Hello, welcome to Who's On Next, the podcast that's sometimes consistent, but most of the times inconsistent. Today I have with me a man that has a resume that spans over 30 years in stage, voice acting, and into doing audiobooks. He's the voice of Devimon in the original Digimon. He was several voices in the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. It is Tom Weiner.
Hello.
Hello, and how are you doing today?
I'm just fine, and I hope the same for you.
I'm doing good. It's a bit hot in here because my office has not been very well ventilated lately. So
I'm sorry.
And also the amount of acoustic foam I have in here also probably doesn't help.
Aha.
Yeah. But yeah, so I guess we'll just get this started. So what is it that got you interested in acting?
I was born with that. I started when I was 10. And I love performing. I did my first movie when I was 10, which your older listeners will remember. It was called An Affair to Remember with Deborah Carr and Cary Grant.
Wow.
And I was one of the orphans in the orphan band. Now, there are two versions of An Affair to Remember. One is the cut version, which is 2 hours long for TV, but the full version, the 2-hour and 15-minute version, has the scene with the orphan band, and you will see cute, chubby little Tommy playing the drums in the orphan band. And Deborah Carr came up to me after the first shot, and she patted me on the head and said, "I think you have a future in this business, young man." So, but I started pretty young.
That's crazy. I don't like it's especially at an age that young, because I guess with child actors, a lot of the time it's a gamble, because it's either they star in one thing or two things, or they end up becoming like Kurt Russell. There's like two kinds of child actors.
Well, I did not star in anything until much later in life. But my stage career really came first before voice acting. And that stage is still my passion. Something I would rather do than anything else in life. But I am of an age now, I'm 73, I'm about to be 74 on the 16th, that, there aren't that many roles for the elderly. But I just moved to Redlands, California, from Santa Cruz, California. And I can give you my geographical background. It's crazy. But at any rate, I'm now living in Southern California, and there are a couple of community theaters and a couple of other theaters that I'm interested in getting involved with. But theater, because of COVID, went downhill very quickly. But now it's coming back. So I'm eager to get involved again on stage.
And I guess, what was the thing that got you really interested in doing stage work as a kid?
My parents took me to shows. I saw Mary Martin in Peter Pan, and I was hooked. When I was 16, I went to New York to work at the World's Fair.
Wow.
And spent every night on Broadway watching shows. And I think the thing that finally hooked me was I saw Barbra Streisand doing her fourth performance of Funny Girl when she was just starting out. And there was a 10-minute standing ovation. And I thought, that's what I want. No, I've always had acting in my blood. I've also always had music in my blood. I was a natural-born drummer. I had a great sense of rhythm. And I did play professionally for several years during and after college. I was in jazz combos and bands and stuff like that. So both those things are just kind of in me. What can I tell you?
With stage, I guess, because I guess for me, stage was always something I've always had very bad stage fright when it comes to doing like theater productions. So, like, was that ever a thing at the start, or did you actually just go all in as a kid?
Never.
Really?
Never. No, I wanted to be out there. When I was 12 years old, I was at a place called Isomata, which is a USC artistic summer camp, including theater. and I played my first lead role, the Emperor in the Emperor's New Clothes. And I couldn't wait to get on stage. So no, stage fright was never a thing.
So there was never really a sense of intimidation you felt, like in going in front of a crowd or anything?
No. Exactly the opposite. I wanted to show off. And I was with several companies. I was with the Oregon Shakespeare Festival and Berkeley Shakespeare Festival when it existed. It doesn't anymore. And with a group called the New Shakespeare Company of San Francisco. And I toured the United States for 3 years with them. And that was probably the most fun time I ever had in my life, was those 3 years. I love to tour. I love touring. It's really fun. And then the way I got into voice acting was I'd come back to Los Angeles after being in Oregon and San Jose Rep, where I opened their first season. And they no longer exist. But I came back to LA and was doing Shakespeare at the Little Globe Theater on Kings Road in Los Angeles. And the woman who was doing sound on Hamlet, I played Claudius. I had played Claudius on tour for 3 years. I'd played it about 500 times. And I was doing Claudius in Hamlet at the Little Globe Theater. And the woman, Bird Ellman is her name, God bless her, she was doing sound effects on the show. And she said, listen, you have a perfect voice for a show I'm dubbing. Would you come up and give it a shot? I said, well, I've never done that before, but I'll be happy to try. And it turned out I was a natural for it, for doing ADR, automated dialogue replacement, which is when you dub one of the forms of ADR is when you dub something from one language into another language, and that involves writing a script that where the words in English will match the mouth movements of the other language, and that's a very difficult enterprise. But even my very first job, I said to Bird, it was something about a German general, and I said, Bird, the words that are written in English mean the same thing as the German, but the lip sync is going to be awful. Can I rewrite this? She said, I thought you've never done this before. I said, well, I haven't, but I can see it won't sync. So I rewrote about half the script, and a week later I was hired as a scriptwriter. That was for Intersound Studios, which was the production arm of Harmony Gold. And then I became a director there, and then moved on from there to Saban Entertainment, where I was an actor and director and casting director and editor and eventually a producer at Saban Entertainment. I was there for 20 years.
Wow. So it's interesting because Harmony Gold, I know, was one of the first, I think like one of the first major dubbing companies in the 80s, because I know they were responsible for a now partially lost dub of Dragon Ball. I think it was the first dub, actually, back in the 1980s.
Well, I never did Dragon Ball. I was never in Dragon Ball, but we did the first major anime thing we did was Robotech.
Right, because that was I think like 2 years after Transformers had become a huge thing. I think that was like 85, 86. I think something around that period.
Robotech, it was somewhere around there.
Was there ever any like live action dubbing as well? Because I know that was another thing some studios did back then, was foreign films.
Well, yeah. When I started out at Intersound, one of my first assignments was to take two miniseries, one French and one Italian. They were each 6 hours long, and my job was to edit them to 4 hours long.
Wow.
So they could be 4 episodes.
Oh my
one
God.
was William the Conqueror, and one was La Belle Otero. La Belle Otero starred Harvey Keitel, among other people. And I had to find a voice match for Harvey Keitel. And I did a wonderful, wonderful man and voice artist named Bill Capizzi, who is no longer with us, unfortunately. And he did a Harvey Keitel, and no one would believe it wasn't Harvey Keitel. They thought we had grabbed, because when you do European shows that are filmed in Europe, they have all the actors speaking in their own language. So you'll have people on set that are speaking Italian, German, English, French, all at the same time, and they all have the versions of the scripts in their own language. but they also know what the other people are saying in other languages. So Harvey Keitel was speaking English. Mimsy Farmer, an expatriate Italian American voice artist, was doing one part, and I can't remember the name of the actress who played La Belle Otero. Was a courtesan of the early 19th century. She was very, very famous. Bill Capizzi, who did Harvey Keitel, it was so perfect that they thought that I had somehow gotten his dialogue out of the original and put it in there, but not the case. Not the case. I had to do the edit decision lists for those, and at that time, that was before Avid existed, so it was frame accurate editing, an edit decision list that I had to make of 6 hours to 4 hours. It took months. It took me a month for each one, just to do the edit decision list. So, big job.
Well,
but yeah, we did live action then. Yeah.
And I assume that this was like film. Was this film strip kind of editing? Like, was this where you having to actually like go through and cut through different strips of film, or how did the editing process actually work?
No. We didn't have to cut through strips of film. It had already been. That's the way it was edited originally in France and Italy. But no, we were using. I feel ashamed that I really don't know what kind of machines we were using to edit, but it wasn't Avid yet because that wasn't out yet. But it was electronic.
So it was with the way you were explaining. So this movie was kind of like I know Dario Argento, I think, was famous for doing the same thing. He would have actors of all different nationalities come in, and they'd all speak their native language, and then they dub over all the actors into one language. So
that's right. That's exactly right. So when I was writing the script for the English version, the people who were actually speaking English, I had to read their lips to figure out exactly what they were saying in English. That was an interesting exercise.
Yeah, because I think Suspiria was a very famous horror movie in the 70s. Was like one of the first major films, I think, to do that, and that was Argento. I think it was German production, and it was like Italian, Spanish, English, and like Swiss actors, and they were all speaking their native languages together. And they had to basically figure out how to direct each other without understanding what they were saying, which I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine doing that.
Well, they were all given scripts with the full script in their own language.
Right.
So they knew what the other people were saying.
Right. Yeah. It's just crazy to me. You know what they're saying, but at the same time, some people you don't know what they're saying, but you do. It's a weird hodgepodge of having to figure out what to do at the same time while working on a production like that.
Mm-hmm.
With voiceover as a whole, like, was that ever difficult at the same, like, in terms of how you said you were never really intimidating doing stage acting? Was like getting behind a mic, was that still the same way? Like, were you never really uncomfortable or just awkward about it?
It was so much easier. It was so much easier. It was so relaxed. It was so much fun. But I was not the kindest of directors. Once I became a director, I did some things which were not very nice. I fired a couple of people during sessions, which was very embarrassing to them and very humiliating. And now I wish I could apologize. I wish I could find them and take it back. But I was pretty full of myself in those days. I've changed considerably since then. But I just things kept getting handed to me, and I kept rising in the ranks until I got to be a producer. Then I had a kind of a falling out with Saban. Not with Chaim Saban. He and I were friendly, but with their production manager, Eric Rollman. He and I sort of got into it because what happened was that I had directed a show called Technoman, 49 episodes, really good science fiction, good production values, and I had a great cast. Well, it took a year to do that show. It was 49 episodes. And I had to edit all of them first, to take out small things unacceptable to to even an international audience, like crucifixions and things like that. Well, after I finished it, one of the executives from Saban moved to UPN, and UPN wanted the show, but because the original had been done for Saban International, there were still things in it that weren't acceptable for an American audience, including the fact that Saban Entertainment had not done their due diligence in their research about what names were copyrighted and which weren't that we could use in the show. Well, they did it for the names, but they didn't do it for action figures. Well, it turned out that the hero of the story is named Blade.
Oh, no, I know where this is going.
Yeah, and Wesley Snipes had the right to that for action figures. So when it went over to Saban, Saban said, no, we can't use Blade because we can't make an action figure named Blade because Wesley Snipes owns that. Well, the whole premise of the Technomen was that they all had names that were bladed weapons, axe, sword, scimitar, things like that. And Blade, of course, was the generic Blade. And I said, well, if you're going to rename him, it's got to be a name of a bladed weapon. Otherwise, it will make no sense, because that's what the Technomen are. They're all bladed weapon warriors. And what did they name him? Slade.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. So what that meant was that not only did we have to record every line of dialogue with his name in it again, but two of the actors decided that because it was now with UPN, which was a network, it wasn't just Saban Entertainment, it was a network, that they deserved more money for doing it again. Well, they were fired, so we replaced those two actors. So not only did we have to do every line of dialogue with the name Blade in it, we had to do every line of dialogue of those two actors who were major characters in the show. So basically, we had to do the whole thing over again.
Oh, God.
And it took another year. And that's when I became the producer of the show. And the people at UPN, it was a 49-episode show. And they played the first 25 episodes and then stopped it. And just kept playing the same first 25 episodes over and over again, leaving the viewer stranded in the middle of the show, not knowing what was going to happen. And they ruined it. So Technoman, which could have been, I think, pretty popular, went right down the tubes because nobody wanted to watch a show that didn't have an ending. That was a shame.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I remember the movie Secret of Nim, the Don Bluth movie back in the 80s. They had to go back and re-edit all the dialogue because the book that the movie was based on was, the main character's name was Mrs. Frisbee. And they found out near the end of production of the film that they were basically afraid that the company that owned the trademark to Frisbee would sue them. So they had to go back, and they did not. I applaud whoever edited that movie. They did not go back and re-record every bit of dialogue where they said her name. They took every instance of an actor saying BR and changed the name to Brisbee in the movie. I don't know. Again, I don't know who that editor was, but I give them so much credit that they were able to go back and cost-effectively edit the whole movie to change a name.
Well, we didn't do it cost-effectively because I was told when the show was bought by UPN, I was told by Eric Rollman, the head of production at Saban, to give her, the woman, the executive, Ellen something, I can't remember her name. Anyway, to give her whatever she wanted. And that meant editing every episode and for the new dialogue and the new name. And there was no way to do more than one per week. So I ended up getting paid $3,000 a week during the run of that show. And in the middle of it, he called me into the office and said, "We can't afford this. We're not going to give you this much money." I said, "Excuse me, but you said to give her whatever she wanted, and that's how long it takes." And we got into what was called a labor dispute. They ended up paying me, but that pretty much sealed my fate at Saban because I won the labor dispute.
Wow.
And after that, they pretty much wanted to have nothing to do with me.
And this was in what, like 96, 95 when this happened?
Yeah, something like that. I really can't tell you exactly, but yeah, somewhere around there.
I was actually going to ask. So you were still working with Saban though in the mid to late 90s.
Yes.
After this happened.
Yes. What happened with Power Rangers is kind of a cute story. Chaim called all the directors of all the shows in to the conference room, and he threw 2 magazines down in front of each of us. One was a Power Rangers fan mag from Japan, and the other was an issue of Time or Newsweek or something that had a picture of Steven Spielberg with a Tyrannosaurus Rex behind him, advertising Jurassic Park. And he said, "We are going to combine these 2 things and make $1 gazillion." And thus was born Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. 2 of the scripts in the first season. And they recorded that in Valencia, at their studios in Valencia. And I was there all the time, day after day, because I did a gazillion characters in that show, some of which weren't even credited. You know, a roar here and a scream there and a I'll get you there, and, like that.
Mighty Morphin is responsible, because Fox Kids was that whole thing where a lot of still very prominent anime voice actors have come from that show. Same with something like Digimon. Like, I think I know Richard Epcar came from that. I think Kirk Thornton came from that too. They both
in fact,
came from that.
In fact, I gave Kirk Thornton his career. Kirk and I had worked at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival together, and I came down to LA a year before he did, and I ran into him on the street in the Valley. I said, "Hey, I have a gig for you if you want it. I'm directing voice acting now, and I'd be happy to give you a job." And that's what started him off, and he became really big. Richard and I came up the ranks together. We both started at the same time in like 81, 82.
I think my favorite, because this is actually something I'm wondering, because if I remember correctly, I think it was the first season of I think it was Mighty Morphin. Bryan Cranston was a voice actor for some of the monsters in Power Rangers at the time, and I don't know. I guess
he was also in my show in Technoman.
Yeah,
I hired him for one of his first voice gigs, and he was so good because I wanted to give him. And Technoman was basically a war story between these evil Technomen and Earth people, and it was all a lot of blood and guts and stuff like that. And I wanted to get my own message in there, and I had Brian come in and do this general. Because Blade, the hero, comes to him and said, "We had a great battle today. We killed tens of thousands of those mutant spider crabs, and they only got four of our guys." And I had Brian's character say, which of course was not in the original at all. He said, "You go ask the families of those 4 guys we lost if it was a victory today. War isn't numbers, Blade. It's people. Always remember that." And Brian, of course, being the brilliant actor he is, he did it. He did that line so beautifully that I kept using it in flashbacks for the whole rest of the series.
I guess in contrast, like, what's it like seeing someone like Brian, I guess, where he is now compared to like working with him back in the 90s? I guess doing stuff like doing stuff like Power Rangers and seeing where his career is now.
Well, Brian and I had known each other from Northern California, and we'd been friends, and he was in our poker group. We used to play poker together and stuff like that. But at a certain point, and I think it was with Malcolm in the Middle, when he started becoming really famous, when people gain that kind of fame, they jump to another level, and basically you just don't see them anymore. So, I mean, we were friends at one point, but now, I haven't talked to him in years. But that happens in show business. People jump up a level or 2 or 3, like he has, and become one of the greatest. And, he has his own a different kind of circle of friends now. But he's the nicest guy in the world. Brian is a fabulous person.
Now, actually, I guess back on Power Rangers, I was curious because I guess what is dubbing something like Power Rangers comparative to something like Digimon or Technoman? Like what is the like, I guess is it a different process for something like live action, or was it about the same? At least for something like that.
It's the same. It's basically the same process, but with Power Rangers, it was pretty sloppy. When you have just a big giant stomping around, and their mouths really aren't moving, or if they are, they're literally rubber lips that are flapping around. You don't pay too much attention to lip sync. Lip sync isn't really that important. It's the intention that's more important. And, getting the evil attitude or the peaceful attitude or the calm attitude. It's the attitude and intention that's important in a thing like Power Rangers. Whereas with other stuff, like, let's say, Street Fighter, lip sync was extremely important to really give some substance to the characters, to make it really look like they were speaking those words. My favorite being Wolf Rain. I played Quent Yaden in that show, the old wolf hunter. And the message of that show, and that show had a story, a real, honest-to-God story. And those were always my favorite shows that had real stories behind them, that weren't just a bunch of action, Yahoo stuff. In fact, my favorite series that I directed was one that you might not be familiar with. It was a kid's show called Noozles.
And I do not know that one. Was that Fox Kids?
It's a really fun show.
Was that?
I don't know. It was about two magical koala bears, excuse me. Panda or koala, I'm not sure. Who were bought at a garage sale, as stuffed toys, who come alive when they're alone with Sandy, the 14-year-old that is their friend, and they save the world. And there's a funny or touching story about that. I was at a convention, a Power Rangers convention, and a young lady walked up to the table where myself and Wendy Lee were sitting. And Wendy Lee, I think, played one of the bears. And this girl walked up and she said, You were one of the bears in Noozles, weren't you? And she was like crying, or starting to cry. And Wendy Lee said, yeah, but this is the director right here, and pointed to me. And she really started to cry. She said, I just want you to know that show, this girl was about maybe 14. She said, that show changed my life. When I saw that show, it made me realize that no matter how young you were, you could make a difference, and that I could make a difference. And it brought me out of a very deep depression and literally saved my life. It was so touching to hear directly from someone that I had an effect on their lives.
Wow. I mean, I've heard stories about that kind of thing before, but it's something it's just so it's just on another level of emotional to hear. Just so, like, someone, like, specifically singling you out for something like that is just, I can't even imagine, like, that happening to just someone coming up to you and saying something that incredibly just emotional.
And personal. And,
yeah.
It was quite a moment. I realized that I had a one sheet, those 8x10 glossies that they put out for shows. I had one sheet left, I remembered, in the trunk of my car from Noozles, and I said, you wait right here, and I ran out and got it for her. And she just burst into tears. She said, how much do you want for this? I said, it's yours, take it. And she just bawled her eyes out. It was quite a touching moment, and didn't get enough of those. I've had a lot, I've gone to a lot of conventions and people compliment me on my work and want my autograph and stuff like that. But that's not the same. That's just, trying to get a little bit of a famous person's stuff in your life, or famous to them. But that was a real touching moment. One of my favorite in my career.
Yeah. And I guess, with voice, cause you've done, some video games before too, because there's Castlevania. Playing Death in Castlevania is probably one of the more prominent ones that I've been aware of. And
Uh-huh.
Was doing video games like pretty much the same as doing anime work for you, or was it like a little bit different?
Well, the video games like World of Warcraft, I played 8 roles in that. And that was fun because they liked me a lot. They liked my voice. But, and it became huge, just huge. But my favorite video game that I did was Star Trek Judgment Rights, because I got to do a voice match with Roger C. Carmel, who had done Harry Mudd in Star Trek.
Yeah.
The guy who said, Captain Kirk, how nice to see you, Daddy. That guy who brought the tribbles on board the ship. Anyway, he was supposed to do the role, and he suddenly died 6 months before the production.
Right.
And I was called in to do a voice match for him, and it was 14 pages of single-space dialogue, more than I'd ever seen in a video game. And that was fun because I got to do his voice. It was also fun because William Shatner came in right after me, and I got to hear a bit of the session. To say that he was difficult to direct would be, let's just say, an understatement.
Well, and I know that was during that period, because that was very early like voice acting in video games. But it wasn't it wasn't different. I mean, basically, it was lip sync, and lip sync is the same whether you're doing live action or animation. I mean, live action is more difficult because you have to be more careful. But basically, it's the same thing. You stand in front of a microphone, and you try to do perfect lip sync with the mouth, and your attitude and your acting and all that, and all of that comes into it. But generally speaking, it's kind of a solitary profession, because there are times when you'll bring a bunch of people into a room and do walla meaning a group crowd scene. Yeah.
And there are different ways of doing that. For instance, I remember in the Addams Family, we did a lot of donut work, which means you walk around in a circle and you pass the microphone, as big as the circle is, you pass it every once in a while, and you use some different voices each time you go by, and that provides the sound of the crowd in the background. But generally speaking, it's a solitary profession because you only have one actor in there at a time, doing their role all the way through an episode, or as many episodes as you can fit in.
I know anime is primarily just a lone thing. You're usually just in a very small room, or just with the director. You have a chair and it's just a small room and you record together, and that's pretty much it. There's not usually, it's not like something on Cartoon Network or Nick, where I know they normally all do a read together or something like that.
Yeah, well, I haven't been involved with that kind of ADR ever.
What, like a recording session where there's normally like 4 or 5 people together?
I would direct those. I did a few of them, but they were crowd scenes where it didn't really matter what you said. With people yelling and shouting in the background, or doing battle sounds, grunts and screams and stuff like that, but nothing very difficult.
Right, yeah, because it's usually a noise pollution thing. That's how I've always heard it described, primarily, if there's like multiple people in a room together, primarily for anime work.
I think for any work, any dubbing work, yeah.
Yeah.
This is true.
There's actually something I was very interested in when I was going through your resume, because you were I guess you would say you were a notable character in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Not like a heavily recurring, not a heavily recurring role, but a notable one-off character in Sid the Dummy. And I guess working on what was the process like working on a show like Buffy as opposed to working on something like Power Rangers?
Much more fun. Power Rangers was it was a lot of monsters and stuff. I did do like General Furio, who was a real character, and there was some live action actors in there. But generally, Buffy, Sid is my favorite character that I've ever done.
Really? Wow.
So what's your game, kid? So you're a Slayer, huh? I knew a Slayer once back in the 30s. Korean chick. Very hot. That was Sid. And when, I forget, he's very famous, the director of that show, the producer.
Joss Whedon? Or not Joss? No.
Yeah, Josh.
Yeah.
When Josh brought me in for the audition, he said he wanted a voice like Lee J. Cobb. And that's the voice that came out. Anyway, but what was really fun was doing the video game 7 years later. Because doing Sid again, my agent called me and said, "Didn't you do this character named Sid on Buffy?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, they're looking for the person who did it. They're looking all over town." Well, that's me. So I got hired to do the job. And Sid was the showrunner of that video game. He was the person you came to for weapons and this, that, and the other. And at the end, they had a special little segment where they filmed. They actually had the dummy, Sid the dummy. They actually had the dummy there. And they put him in one chair and put me in another chair. And we had an interview.
Oh, that's great.
Sid and I were talking to each other. Yeah, that's a fun thing to watch. Anyway, I love doing Sid. That was a really fun role.
Because I've spoken to a few voice actors before about doing, I guess bigger productions. Because I remember talking to Tom Kenny about doing the Transformers, the Michael Bay movies. And I just remember it's so interesting when you hear about the voice production of like a big live action movie or show, and how it's much more, it feels a lot more loose whenever I hear it described, when I hear about productions like that.
Well, when the mouths don't move and they're communicating via telepathy, it's a hell of a lot easier than like when I was doing Transformers on TV and Robots in Disguise. I mean, their mouths moved, and you had to do lip sync. And I was doing Grimlock, and I got a lot of a lot of kidding about what I was as a vehicle. I was a backhoe. And I got a lot of shit for that. Hey, backhoe, why don't you come service me over here? But yeah, it was. I remember the first Transformers convention I went to, and even though I played a pretty minor role, we got treated like royalty, and that was fun. But I don't really go to conventions anymore. They usually turn out to be more of a hassle than anything else. But I used to go to all the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers conventions, and that was more like fun because you got to see your colleagues again, who you may not have seen for a while. But I've lost touch with most of those people now.
Right, yeah, because I've known people that have gone to conventions and they meet someone that they worked with, but they never technically met. Like, like I remember that there's been, I think, actors for Pokemon or things like that where they were like characters that were paired up together and they like didn't meet each other till like 7 years later, and they like never physically met in the same room. Which it's so funny to me hearing about that, especially when it's like characters that are like a duo or a pair of some kind, and they've like never actually met.
Well, as you said, anime is basically one actor at a time in the studio. So sometimes you could be a week apart; you'll never meet them.
I guess another big one for me, I guess, as a kid growing up in the '90s, a big show for me was Digimon, and Devimon was the primary villain of, I guess, not the first arc of season 1, I guess.
Yeah, that's the character that I've gotten the most fan mail for. I gotten fan mail from Sweden.
Wow.
Begging me to sign their Devimon cards, these little trading cards that they have. And evidently they're worth 100 times as much if it's signed. And they wrote these long letters describing their lives and how much Digimon had meant to them as children, and still they had a fond place in their hearts. And they were basically just asking for an autograph. So, I autographed their cards and sent them back. But it was kind of touching.
It's so funny to me because Devimon, I went back to the show a couple years ago. It's funny because I felt like Devimon had shown up very early on in the beginning of the show, and he didn't show up, I think, till about 8 episodes into the first season. Like it's funny.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, he's the primary antagonist to the first arc, and I don't think you actually see him until about 8 episodes in. And then you don't see him again for a while in that first arc. I think you only see him a handful of times, which I guess I always just found so funny because he always stuck out so much in my mind as a kid.
Well, in the second season of Digimon, I was doing the announce at the end.
Oh, the cliffhanger, like to be continued? Yeah. On
Digimon Digital Monsters.
Oh my God, I did not know that was you.
Yes, it was.
Okay, so basically it was after you were done playing Devimon, they just had you come in and start doing that, like during the second
I guess.
part.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. I guess a thing I've been curious about, again, you've done script writing, you've done voiceover. What was the thing that got you to do voice direction primarily?
Well, I started doing script writing, as I described, at Infrasound, and it came to me very naturally. And I did so many scripts for the first show I did, that they decided who better to direct it than the guy who knows the story better than anybody. So I started directing, and that was, I believe the first show was The Adventures of Willie Fogg, which was Around the World in 80 Days.
Right, yeah.
Animated. And then was Dogtanian and the Three Musketeers. So later they changed it to Dogtanian and the Three Muskehounds. And, they were all dogs. And that was a lot of fun.
And I guess, what was it like having to become a director? I mean, I guess, was it just kind of surprising that they were just like, hey, do you want to be in charge of the voice actors? Or like was it just kind of surprising?
No, it just seemed to come naturally. It was just, another, little raise in my, just another recognition of the ability that I had in that field. It just came very naturally to me. Being an actor and being a good voice actor and knowing lip sync the way I did, I was very, very picky. I mean, I was known as Mr. Late. That is, when somebody would start late, I'd go, late, before they even finished the line. And people would greet me that way. I'd walk into a room and everybody would go, late. So I was very picky about lip sync. And the studio found out, very, early on in my career as a director that I was very good at it. So it just seemed to come naturally to me. I don't mean that to sound egocentric. It was just the path I was on, and it continued for it was kept about 25 years.
I guess, did you leave Saban, or was it just like, because I know that I think there was a big shift in Saban's management, because I think Disney ended up buying them in the mid-2000s, if I remember correctly. It didn't happen while I was there. Okay. I was already gone by then. Yeah, I went over. I left LA. I literally couldn't handle LA anymore. It had gotten to me. So I moved back to Oregon, where I had been with the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and found Blackstone Audio in the phone book of all places by accident. And I called them and I went in for an audition and they hired me immediately. And I did 250 audiobooks over the next 9 years. Wow. And I guess was that the point where I guess voice acting just kind of slowed down when you moved? I guess in terms of character work.
I don't know. I don't know that it did. I had just had enough of it. And when I moved to Oregon, I had no plans to be an audiobook narrator. It happened just sort of by accident, and turned out I was good at it. And they hired me. So, and then 9 years later, they fired me. We had a misunderstanding. And it was sort of a political thing where some people there didn't like me and arranged for me to get canned. So I did a couple of more books for Audible, and then I moved from Oregon down to Santa Cruz, California, where I had gone to school at UC Santa Cruz. And I stayed in Santa Cruz for 5 years. And then I looked up an old lady friend of mine from 34 years previous, who I suddenly got the motivation to find online. And now we're living together in Redlands, California. And I have made some inquiries with a couple of my old acting mates in the voice business in ADR, and have made some progress in looking for work there, but it would be a hell of a commute. It's about, an hour and 15 minutes from where I am to LA to go to a studio. And the thing is, because I just moved here into a house that doesn't really have a space for a home studio, there's really no place to put a home studio here. And most people who are doing ADR now are doing it from home studios,
right?
Even if it's their closet. But I don't have a space here for that. So I would probably have to go, if it were like with Bang Zoom or with, what's the name of that studio?
Not Funimation? Or I think Funimation.
No, it's, hold on. Oh, I'm blanking out.
I know there's, I think Sound Cadence is down there too, but I think that's a different company.
Well, there's a whole bunch of them down here. Anyway, there are also little independent studios right around where I live in Riverside and San Bernardino. And if I wanted to do audiobooks again, I could go on to ACX, Audiobook Creation Exchange, and audition for books if I so choose. Because those books, the people who make the decisions about who does the narration on those books are the authors. It's not like auditioning for Penguin or Random House or, people like that, who basically have their own little, teams of voice actors that they like to use. But it's the authors that pick the narrators. So I could do that again if I so choose. But that would mean going out and hiring a little independent studio and doing some auditions. And at this point, I'm still in the midst of the move that I just made. I mean, I'm 73, about to be 74, and I've basically been carrying my whole life around with me. So organizing this new house that I'm in and getting a storage space and all that stuff has been taking up most of my time. So at the moment, I'm not doing anything in the way of voice work. I'm concentrating on getting settled, but eventually I'll get back to it.
And I guess audiobooks has always been intriguing to me, because I guess what is the primary process to getting work in doing an audiobook exactly? Is it an audition process like voiceover, or like how's it work?
Well, with Blackstone, I called up, I said I wanted to audition, and they gave me an audition, and I got the job. The same is true of, I think, Dayan, or however you pronounce it, Deyan, or Random House or Penguin. I mean, I think you would have to do, a substantial portion of a book, or 3 or 4 pages to audition for them. Or I could just send them my resume. Like I say, I've done over 250 of them, or 230 of them. And say, this is who I am, and I'd like to work for you, and see what happens. Or you can go on to Audiobook Creation Exchange and do it as a freelancer and say, what on ACX, if you're not familiar with it, is a site where you go on and you can search for books that are available for auditions. And you'll come up with about 3,000 books. And then you narrow it down by filters, that is to say, male or female. Well, I'm a male, so that would cut it down to 1,500 books. I charge a certain amount per hour, per finished hour. PFM, PFH, per finished hour means I could spend 40 hours recording a book. But if it turns out to be 10 hours long, I only get paid for the 10 hours. Those are finished hours. So I charge around $300 per finished hour. And that will cut it down even more because they're looking for people who are cheaper. But I've had enough experience that I can ask that much reasonably. And then it will say, will you do erotica? And my answer to that would be no. So that will cut it down further. So eventually, what you end up with is 20 books that are available for audition. And they will supply you with an audition script. You go to a studio and you record it and you send it into them. And then the authors pick the narrators.
Okay, so basically it's just a bunch of people do audition, but like the author themselves handpicks the person they think who fits the best for reading the book.
Yeah, with ACX, that's the way it works. Yes.
Okay, that's interesting. I've never actually known that. I've never actually really known how the audiobook process works compared to just doing voiceover work for TV or movies.
Well, you can also, if you're lucky, like when I was with Blackstone, I always had books. There was one book after another, after another, after another, after another. Whether it was history or science fiction or biography or whatever, it didn't matter what it was. They just kept supplying me with books because I was one of their team. And I would love to get together with another, audiobook publishing house like that. But I haven't really pushed it because right now I'm still in the middle of this cacophony, this weirdness of moving, and I'm in an unfamiliar place, and I really haven't pushed that. I haven't been really looking for work that hard because I really don't need to look that hard. But eventually, it does add to my self-esteem to be doing something I'm good at. But if I could get some stage work, I'd much prefer that, even if I'm doing it for no pay at a regional, not a regional theater, but at a community theater. I love being on stage. That's my favorite. I also, I still have my drum set, and I might put some feelers out if anybody's looking for a drummer for a small band or a jazz combo or something like that. I could do that. I
guess actually, were there any other notable? Because you brought up the film you did when you were 10 years old. Was there any other notable film work that you've done, like in terms of live action work?
I have a funny story about that. When I was 14 years old, I did a sex ed film.
Oh, no.
Which you can look up, called Boy to Man. And it was about puberty. Well, it showed me picking pimples and stuff like that. And then it would have diagrams of what happened when you went through puberty and like that. And it won third place at the Venice International Film Festival.
Wow.
The year it was released. And I was a natural actor in front of a camera. I don't know why. It just came very natural, knowing where the camera was and looking away from it and all that. And it was just very natural to me. So at any rate, when I moved, when I was in college, years later, of course, I had a girlfriend who later, in her 30s, became a substitute teacher, and she was usually put in the sex ed classes.
Oh, no.
And usually women taught the women and men taught the boys. But in this case, there was a mix-up, and she taught a boys' sex ed class.
Oh, no.
And it said to put on this film.
Oh, no.
And she was looking away from the screen, and the voice comes on and says, "This is Tommy. He's 14 years old." And she turns around, and it's me, her ex-boyfriend.
Oh, no. So she called you, and you were like, were you in a film when you were a kid?
No, no, we were out of touch at that point, but she told me about it later when we got back together for a while. And that was hysterical. A great story.
Oh my God. Oh my God. That reminds me of I think I remember like one of the actors from Breaking Bad did like a sex ed film on like girls having their periods or something when he was like 15.
Uh-huh.
And I remember I think they showed it on Conan like when he was on like for an interview.
That's great.
Yeah, no. But yeah, was there like much other like major film, like big film work that you had ever gotten? I mean, again, I guess not as a main character, but was there ever any other like
Well, I did one film. I did one film as the co-star. It was a porn film.
Oh, no.
And the name of it, yes, and the name of it is China Girl.
Oh,
now, there
no.
are about 4 movies with that name.
Oh, no.
But you couldn't find it. The star was Annette Aben, who was the number 2 porn star in the world at that point, just behind Marilyn Chambers, who had just done Deep Throat. And she was my co-star. You never really saw my package, so it's not too embarrassing. But I learned a lot about doing film, doing that, because we did it in Sausalito, we did it in Marin Woods, we did it on the ferry crossing over to Sausalito, we did it in various locations, and it was a fascinating process. I really enjoyed it.
Was this like guerrilla filmmaking porn, or was this like...
No. This was mainstream.
Okay, so this wasn't like a lower budget like porn film or something like that.
No, this was a full... I mean, the last shot in the film is taken from the top of the Golden Gate Bridge, zooming down on me and Annette on the ferry going to Sausalito. I mean, that was a very expensive shot. But no, this was top of the line. It was produced by the Browns, Summer and Eddie Brown, if you're looking for it. And I was pretty good. I saw it not too long ago. I wasn't bad. I mean, the acting part, the sex part, no, I was not good at that. But the audition was interesting when I auditioned for it.
What is
Summer Brown, the producer?
You gonna say, yeah? What's
Summer
the
Brown, the producer,
process?
who was a very beautiful young lady, or she was older than I was, but she was sitting in a chair, and the lines were something about seduction. You know, how would I seduce her? And I said, well, I do something like this. And I approached her, and I leaned down, and I kissed her cheek, and then I kissed her neck, and then I kissed her mouth, and she broke away and said to her husband, Eddie, yeah, this guy will do. That was the audition.
And had they met with other people that day, I assume?
I assume. But I was kind of a hunk in those days. I was very different than I am now.
And when was this? Was this the 70s?
Yeah, 73, I believe.
Okay. You know, I gotta say, going into this, I didn't expect a porn film to actually be one of the things brought up.
It was a very interesting process. It was. I could tell you stories about it, but I don't know that your audience would. I mean, well, I'll tell you one. We were filming on the Muir Woods Road, on the other side of the Golden Gate. And the deal was that I was chasing my car. I was in a sports car chasing this Rolls Royce. And we go around a bend, and the camera loses sight of us. Well, the next shot is a Rolls Royce going down the hill, and my waiting at the top of the hill unseen, and then my going down the top from the top of the hill down, following them. Well, before the shot actually started, a highway patrolman pulled up behind me.
Oh, no.
Now, do you know who James Hong is? The actor.
Oh yeah,
Chinese
no,
actor?
I love James Hong.
He was in this movie.
I've heard of this movie. Now that you bring this up.
He was the bad guy. Yeah, he was the bad guy. Anyway, so he's supposed to be in the Rolls Royce, and he's tall and skinny, and Eddie Summer, one of the producers, he was substituting because there was no reason for James Hong to be there because it was such a distant shot. But Eddie was wearing his top hat and his big overcoat, so it would look like him from the back. And I was just doing me. So the highway patrolman pulls up behind me and says, excuse me, sir, what are you doing here? I said, oh, we're filming. He said, well, you're not allowed to do that without a permit. I said, well, you'll have to talk to the producer. He's in the Rolls Royce up there. So the cop rolls his car down behind the Rolls, and Eddie rolls down the window, and here he is, this guy who's about 5'5", wearing this huge overcoat and this gigantic top hat, smoking a joint. And the highway patrolman, he just rolled over laughing. He just bent over and started laughing hysterically. He said, you can't film here. You've got to move your car. You could barely speak. It was very funny. Anyway, that was a story from that shoot.
That's crazy to me, because this actually comes full circle, because there's a documentary, there's a YouTuber I watch that does documentaries on character actors, and he did one on James Hong, and he talked about this movie, this exact movie you're talking to me about. Yes.
Yeah,
well, he brought up.
Go.
Yeah, he brought up how, like, at one point James Hong did a couple porn films, and he, like, produced one or two of them or something like that. That's weird. No, I think I'd say that's a good spot to end it for the podcast.
Okay.
But I gotta say again, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, you're more than welcome. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, and I guess is there any advice to aspiring actors that you could give?
Yeah, one would be the word "don't do it." It's a tough profession, but if you have a passion for it, don't give up on your dreams, especially if you're in a place where there's acting going on. That is to say, living in Wyoming, you're not likely to find what you want. But living in New York or environs or in LA or around the LA area, and some other areas like even Portland, there are certain areas where if you're really good and you can get a foot in the door anywhere, particularly in a non-paying role in a I want to say regional theater, but that's not what I mean, a community theater, anywhere where you can be seen. Because I was doing work at the Globe Theater in LA. I was doing Claudius and Hamlet, and I came out after the show, and Sidney Sheldon was sitting in the audience alone, waiting to see me.
Wow.
He said, "You're Tom Weiner, you played Claudius?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Here's my card, call my office, I may have something for you." And he was one of the biggest producers in Hollywood. And as it ended up, nothing came of it. But I had an opportunity. I was given the opportunity to suddenly become a TV person. And that will happen if you are a quality actor and you can get seen anywhere. Do it, because you never know what's going to happen.